Welcome, welcome. Can we all just get settled in, get what you want to eat or drink? We want to get started with this afternoon's program. It's great to see so many people. I was joking with our guests, maybe we gave out bobbleheads tonight. I'm not sure what we did. He's going to want a part of the gate here if we keep filling the audience like this. So I'm Steve Slick. I'm the director of the University's Intelligence Studies Project. Welcome on behalf of the ISP and also our colleagues at the Strauss Center for International Security and Law, Clements Center for National Security, and our host this evening from the OBJ School of Public Affairs. We're fortunate today to host another distinguished visitor who had the good sense to escape Washington, D.C. for Austin, if only for a few days. And before introducing our guests, I just want to remind everybody how we imagine this event unfolding. We'll try to stick to that. We've agreed that our guests will deliver prepared remarks for give or take 30 minutes. Next, I'll come back up and join him next to these lovely potted palms. We'll have a discussion for a few minutes on intelligence policy issues that are of interest to me and hopefully will be engaging for him as well. And then in the time remaining, I have a handful of questions from that were prepared in advance by students who are in some of our intelligence courses this fall. And so that's how we'll close out. So I remind everybody that the title for this afternoon's event is U.S. Intelligence, New Challenges and Opportunities. Now we can all probably imagine what some of those challenges are, but good intelligence officers are also trained to be alert for opportunities that may exist. And I can think of no better source on those challenges or the hidden opportunities than Andrew Hallman. Just over a month ago, Andrew was announced as the first principal executive of the Office of the Director of National Intelligence. And we'll talk a little bit more later about this new position, but suffice to say that Andrew's performing daily the responsibilities and duties of the Principal Deputy Director of National Intelligence, while that post, and indeed the post of Director of National Intelligence, remain vacant, and that's unprecedented, and we'll talk about that a little bit. Andrew's actually returning to the ODNI in this position after having served as the inaugural Deputy Director for Digital Innovation at the CIA. That new directorate was the centerpiece of major restructuring undertaken at the CIA. I should say modernizing. John Brennan kicked me for that. No restructuring going on, just modernizing. In 2015. Before then, Andrew held a series of leadership positions in CIA's Directorate of Intelligence that, in an apparent effort to confuse all of us, has since been renamed the Directorate of Analysis. And so, along the way, Andrew also had the privilege of serving as an intelligence briefer to President Barack Obama. And we'll touch on that a little bit as well. I first met Andrew in the hectic months after the 9/11 attacks on the 7th floor at CIA headquarters. He was an executive assistant to the Deputy Director for Intelligence. He was then, and I'm certain remains today, the consummate intelligence professional. He's insightful, he's discreet, and maybe most importantly, he's honest. So please welcome Andrew Hallman, University of Texas.
Thank you very much, Steve. So it's great to be here at the University of Texas because, as Steve knows well, this has been about a year in the making. I had intended to get down here at least a year ago. We've been trying to make it work, and fortunately we got to make this work now. So thank you in particular to Steve and the university. I'd like to also call out my family who's here, my sister-in-law, her family. They're native here to Austin, and begged me to come down, so I said I will do that as soon as I can get down. Steve first, Kristen second, but Kristen still refers to me as Agent Andy. Long story there, but I really appreciate the opportunity to speak to you. So as Steve said, I'll give some prepared remarks, and then more importantly, we'll get into a good dialogue here among the potted palms. Seriously, it's really great to be here, and this center, as you know better than I do, is a really critical center here for the study of intelligence. And there's an expression here that rings familiar to you and also to me, which is what starts here changes the world. And I'll come back to that at the end. But that's definitely true for the work that you do for the intelligence community, because this center sparks the national security discussions at the very highest levels. In the past, you brought in some of the most senior officials in U.S. national security. That includes previous directors and principal directors of national intelligence, my predecessor, Sue Gordon, Director Dan Coates and Jim Clapper, agency directors and their deputies, including Robert Cardillo, who was incidentally my first boss at the ODNI back in 2011, as well as Nick Rasmussen and John McLaughlin, all colleagues of mine, very prized colleagues. And then some of our most senior and distinguished military leaders, including Admiral Bill Craven. So that's testament to the work that's done here. I mean, you really attract the finest. It's truly an honor for me to be here next in line to speak with you and contribute to this great learning legacy. So this center focuses an academic lens on the field of intelligence and fostering this intellectual study on the practice as well as theoretical aspects of what that intelligence is and how we apply it in the field. And Austin's a great place for this, not only because it's a really rich environment, which you know, great food, but also because it affords you some distance from Washington, D.C., and what we affectionately refer to as the bubble, because it gives you an opportunity, which is kind of prized in the field of intelligence, of affording you some distance to those halls of power, and really drives home that point of maintaining an objectivity to our intelligence that is, I think, the hallmark of this community. It's one of the reasons why CIA headquarters was located in the suburbs of Virginia as opposed to downtown DC. It's also why RAND Corporation, way back in the 50s, was founded in Santa Monica, California. And that was about really ensuring that the government leaders received this objective analysis then on how to use what was then, and arguably still is, the most advanced technology in the field of warfare, because they needed the analysts to be far away from the District of Columbia. But I would make a very important point here, which is that physical distance really should not be misconstrued. And it belies the reality that really, to be effective, intelligence needs to be inextricably linked with the strategy, planning, and execution of foreign policy. More than ever, this requires the utmost care and intelligence tradecraft, applying it in ways that have value to our decision makers, while maintaining an objectivity and professionalism that upholds the oath of office that we as intelligence professionals take to the Constitution. So here in Austin, you study the field of intelligence, with the goal of helping the intelligence community, but also helping the world understand what the intelligence community does, what it stands for. So we support your work and share your goal. And transparency is a pillar of our national intelligence strategy, most recently issued for 2019, which sets the course for the intelligence community. The IC is committed to educating the American people on what we do and why we do it, because transparency builds trust, and our ability to execute our mission is dependent on the trust and faith of our citizens and customers. And this is one of the reasons why I speak publicly, including here, about the field of intelligence, and that's about building the trust of the American people in our intelligence institutions. It's critically important. So when we sound the alarm on threats to America's national security, we need our policymakers to believe in us, to have faith in what we do and what we tell them. And it's not just policymakers whose trust we need. We need the trust of the American people, because increasingly they're on the front lines of conflict. The current threat landscape is considerably different from what we have traditionally faced. There's no longer this distinction between the front lines of the battlefield and front lines of the homeland. And increasingly, these battlefields transcend national boundaries. Our adversaries do not distinguish between traditional national security targets and the private sector, academic institutions, and critical infrastructure. And they increasingly are targeting the information and information networks on which our society relies. And I'll expand on that in a moment. So the modern intelligence community was created to deliver warning on the most pressing national security threats. And it's no longer sufficient, to only provide a warning to our consumers in the policy community and to our warfighters. Increasingly, we have to provide this service, this warning, to everyone who is targeted by our adversaries. And that includes businesses, it means state and local governments, it means academia, it means our foreign partners. So let me briefly discuss the threats that we're talking about. So these national security threats we face are growing in number, they're growing in range, they're growing in speed, they're growing in complexity. As you know, studying here, power has become more diffuse in the international system, and this challenges the traditional approaches to intelligence that we've employed for so long. So we think about these threats in 3 dimensions. First is the vulnerabilities. What is it about our nation where adversaries are most likely to attack us? Secondly, we think about the adversaries and their capabilities. Who will attack those vulnerabilities? When will they attack them and how? What means will they employ? And the domains for conflict, or as you might think of them, the battlefields, which increasingly have digital dimensions. And we need to make sense of all 3 of these dimensions to provide policymakers and partners with the intelligence to shape security decisions and shape outcomes favorable to U.S. interests. Now, I won't cover the globe here, but I'll give you a sampling of some of those most significant threats facing the United States. And you're familiar with the classical ones that we've talked about at length. Russia, China, Iran, North Korea, global terrorism. And increasingly, it's about great power competition and regional proxy wars. And so the great game, as it's known commonly, no longer practiced on the field of just Afghanistan, it's global. Speakers before me have talked at length about this, so I'm not going to go into those in any detail. But I think one of the most insidious threats facing the United States are the growing foreign influence operations, some that pose a direct threat to our democracy. We face a growing number of these foreign influence operations that are coordinated, multifaceted efforts that apply media and messaging, economic and financial leverage, and diplomatic and political maneuvering to achieve goals often detrimental to the interests of the U.S. and our allies. Our adversaries are operating in the seams of our democratic system, exploiting the gaps and using the tools of traditional espionage in combination with cyber operations and influence campaigns to undermine our confidence in the integrity of our democratic institutions. Russia, China, Iran, and even non-state actors are taking aim at a large number of targets, including political parties, campaigns, election officials, election infrastructure, and public opinion. Their efforts to distort our daily political and social discourse seek to divide us as a nation and deny us the ability to make well-informed decisions about our own destiny. And I can't think of a more grave threat to our nation than denying our ability to choose our own destiny. And we can't tolerate it. So let me talk about the role and mission of the U.S. intelligence community in defending against this growing diversity of threats. Excuse me. As you know, we actually started thinking about this on December 7th of 1941 when our nation experienced the most insidious and dangerous attack in our nation's history. And it was such a shock to our national security system that almost immediately after World War II ended, we began a fundamental restructuring of the intelligence community through the National Security Act of 1947. And on September 11, 2001, the nation fell victim to the most insidious attack since Pearl Harbor, leading to another restructuring of the intelligence community and the creation of the ODNI. So we're days away from the 15th anniversary of the act that established the ODNI being signed into law, which makes this an appropriate time to evaluate the state of U.S. intelligence and our efforts to confront these most pressing threats. So historically, the IC's mission has always been to collect data on our threats and adversaries and produce objective, unvarnished analysis to support policymakers, to give them the intelligence foundation to make good decisions. And for most of the IC's history, that business model that we used to accomplish this has been built around shaping collection strategies to answer specific questions, provide answers to specific questions about these threats. And they will always, be an enduring feature of the business of intelligence, and that's to reveal the secrets denied to us by our adversaries. But this operating construct on its own is inherently limiting because, one, it's too slow to react in our current environment, and two, it's insufficient to anticipate dynamic threats. So today, as we're living in an exponential world characterized by an era of information abundance, as opposed to scarcity, and the rapid democratization of technology. Not only are we challenged by the volume, variety, and velocity of this data, we're challenged to understand how our adversaries are weaponizing this information against us. Succumbing to a cold, excuse me. So let me just give you some perspective on this exponential growth. And you've seen a lot of figures out there. Some experts say that the entire sum of humankind's recorded information is roughly 40 zettabytes, which is almost an incomprehensible number. And now you all know what a gigabyte is, so your phone probably has at least 64 gigabytes of storage. 40 zettabytes of data, the sum total of all information ever created or recorded, equals 40 trillion gigabytes. 40 trillion gigabytes would fill up 625 billion iPhones, excuse me, 9.4 trillion DVDs, which could hold approximately 18.8 trillion hours of video. So that's just recorded history. But the impressive thing is approximately 90% of all that information, 36 trillion gigabytes, has been created just in the past 2 years. So again, the exponential curve of data growth. The data on its own is relatively harmless, but with the democratization of technology, including ubiquitous computing, proliferation of sensors, end-to-end encryption, artificial intelligence, machine learning, and social media, excuse me, the power to destabilize no longer rests solely in the hands of nation states. So just briefly, a few minutes on discussing the role of the ODNI. I'm going to lose my voice. I need to go to potted palms. In fact, I'm going to compress this so we can do that. So really, if you think about the role of the ODNI, it's about orchestration of a vast, complex machinery where each agency of the intelligence community excuse me, brings a comparative advantage. Signals intelligence in the case of NSA, geospatial intelligence in the case of NDA. Very quickly ran through the product lines. So ask me about that community. Skip to the end here. Let me get to the pitch. Just to operate point here. So, thank you. This is not the reason why I invited Kristen. She's a planet's enhanced. Good question. So, we need your help. At the end of the day, everything I've talked about comes down to people. There's surprised men and women of the intelligence community that matter the most, who will make a difference, and that's one of the reasons why I'm here. So, to make these revolutionary changes that the nation requires to keep it safe and secure, we need expertise that comes from a diversity of ideas, from numerous centers of excellence, such as the one I'm standing in today. We need everything from analysts to operations officers, engineers, foreign language experts, program managers, budget professionals, and everything in between, and we want them all to be innovators, as you are. So in the IC, I can say from experience, you'll find a great satisfaction knowing that what you do truly matters. There's a diversity of experiences that you can apply in the field of intelligence, in the course of the intelligence community, but really at the end of the day, it's that intrinsic motivation of knowing that what you do keeps our nation secure. And so you'll have a lot of competing priorities as you go from the field of academic study. I know some of you are from outside the university, but as you face those choices, excuse me, think about, I can be well compensated, you can also be well compensated in the IC. What we have to offer you is truly making a difference and keeping our nation secure. So with that, let's go to our pot of palms. Don't try to remember my voice.
Great. Are microphones on yet?
There we go. Great, thanks. Thank you, Andrew. In sympathy for Andrew losing his voice, I should explain to you what else he's done for us today. We're really grateful. First off, that you're here. Thanks for making the trip, for sharing your remarks. But you all should also understand that we worked Andrew hard today. We had a full table at lunch, including a number of our finest students, and they got some deep and candid insights from Andrew. Based on his career, everybody left better informed and charged up, apropos of the pitch he gave us here at the end. After that, he went over and spoke to Alan Kessler's foreign affairs class, auditorium style class, whole hour of speaking and fielding questions. And then just before he came over here today, he did an interview with the Baines Report, the local blog from the LBJ school run by Student Run, and you can watch for his remarks on there. His voice was still strong while he was talking to Taryn, during that session. And he also took some time this afternoon to share wise counsel with President Pendes, who faces a lot of challenges, more than you would imagine, that relate to national security and intelligence. So thanks for all that.
Thank you.
It's great to have you here. I have a number of questions. We're going to go through as many of them as we can. Just raise your hand if your voice is given out. I'll start talking and you'll all suffer.
It'll be hard questions. It'll be hard questions when I lose my voice.
This is tactical, isn't it? Yeah. So on the position, I mentioned that this is an extraordinary circumstance, and it is. I'm aware of times when we didn't have a director of national intelligence, aware of times when we had a director and didn't have a principal deputy. I'm not aware of any period since the office stood up in the spring of 2005 when both positions were not occupied by, or one of those positions was not occupied by presidentially appointed Senate confirmed official. Without betraying confidences, and you may not have been involved in all of them since some of them predated the offer to you, what was the thought process? How have you and Admiral Joe McGuire, friend of all of ours and the former NCTC director, currently the acting director of national intelligence, how have you decided to divide up the labor? This new position, rather than occupying in an acting capacity one of the previous statutory positions, have you encountered yet any restrictions, any limitations, whether legal or otherwise, affidavits, FISA petitions, things like this? Just anxious to explore a little bit more about how you're dealing with this extraordinary situation.
Good question, Steve. So the first when Joe called me, he made this really strong pitch, and I quickly said, of course, I would take this job, be a partner with him, helping to lead the community. The principal executive position was constructed carefully with a comma after it, which was, comma, performing the duties of the principal director, deputy director of national intelligence, until the position is presidentially appointed and Senate confirmed. The point of it was to empower it in an acting capacity where I had the full authority to carry out the duties of the job. And I have, and I face no restrictions on that, none that I'm aware of anyway. I'm sure lawyers will tell me when I do. But I approach the job, as Joe does, in his acting capacity, with the full commitment of recognizing that with a presidential appointment and a Senate confirmation, you bring a certain mandate to the job. But we view this as we have to carry on the business of intelligence and leadership of the intelligence community, because right now we need strong leadership, stable leadership, because there's, I think, been no more time in history when, one, we've been as relevant as we are now, and two, where I think the profile of the intelligence community has been higher, for good or bad. So we vowed on day one we would exercise strong leadership, but we wouldn't try to self-limit because we're in acting capacities. That's the bottom line.
Terrific. You mentioned in your remarks this document that I'm waving around. It's called the National Intelligence Strategy. If I counted correctly, the ODNI has produced 4 of these, and it's its 15 or so years of existence. And I must admit, these are fairly opaque documents, a little bit Talmudic, a little bit hard to get a lot of understanding out of them. But I think this one may be different. That's what I'm going to ask you about. They're very helpfully arranged in that in the first section, each of them has addressed something they call enterprise objectives. In other words, what the director, and this was Director Dan Coates who signed this one out before he stepped down last summer, where they define some priorities and goals for the office itself, things you want to do with your structure, with your internal organization. And then the second half is devoted to what's going on in the world and what are our priorities going to be for collection and analysis and covert action. So that makes this helpful. I'd like to ask a question on each, both the enterprise objectives and the subject matter objectives. Now, I know you and Admiral McGuire well. I know you don't come to work in the morning and go into your email queue and decide what you're going to do, right? Which ones am I going to answer? What am I going to get involved with? You're strategic thinkers. And so, and you also described to us encouragingly that you're not self-limiting, right? You're not bounding what you can accomplish in the time you have in office. So what are your priorities? What would you like to do on the office side? We'll get to the rest of the world, but with the office that is relatively new, has been subject to some leadership fluidity, some changes rapidly for a while in leadership. What's important to you guys? What would you like to accomplish while you have these jobs?
Yeah, so job one, as we both committed to, was provide stable, strong leadership for the community. And that's not to say anything about people we succeed. It just means right now we need to make sure that we provide that strong, stable leadership. It's job one. When it comes to the strategy, one thing I'll say about strategy is, yeah, it is a bit Talmudic, but it is, I think, rich. But it's not just about that strategy. It's about what we do with that strategy to then provide planning and programming guidance to actually affect how we allocate resources in the field of intelligence to keep the nation secure. So there's an alignment that we do with this to actually turn that into real, tangible mission outcomes. So job number one is strong leadership, and I'll address a couple things. I approach this job as principal executive, and traditionally the way these jobs have been kind of divided up is that the DNI typically provides that senior-most leadership of the community. The principal deputy, in my case the principal executive, is a bit more about how we kind of run the community and resource it and lead it and manage it. And so partly by virtue of what I did at CIA, or much of what I did in the Director of Digital Innovation was about building capacity to make the community stronger. Same thing with how I approach this role. So 6 of the key initiatives that we have in the strategy are aimed at building the capacity to be a stronger community. But so there's that kind of capacity building aspect to it. But my other priority is to ensure that the deputies of the intelligence community that I help lead are operating as a team. So they're not just representatives of single agencies, they are part of a collective to lead the community. And that's, for some agency leaders, that is not necessarily a natural act, because they're hard and they're appointed to lead agencies and represent that capability, again, whether it's human intelligence or signals intelligence or whatever. But to really be an effective community, to integrate it, to orchestrate it, to have the full power of that, we have to operate as a team. So that is a lot of what I pay attention to and what I focus on in leading the deputies of the IC. And Joe similarly views that in his acting DNI role. Topically, the most important mission objective right now for us is securing our elections. And I can talk more about that as I try to share.
Good, thanks. I appreciate that. You started to get at my next question, and this is in part formed by painful personal experience. But since the summer of 2004, when the 9/11 Commission gave its report to President Bush, starting a sequence of events that led to the Intelligence Reform Law, the harmonically described IRTPA, Intelligence Reform and Terrorism Prevention Act. Yeah, somebody should have thought about that before they created that act. Anyway, so leading to the IRTPA in the fall, and as you said, the ODNI stood up 15 years ago in the spring.
We'll just call it the Act.
The Act, okay. There's been a healthy debate, and that's a charitable description, of what the law created, what we needed in a director of national intelligence. And you know this history as well as I do, but we've had different directors who've had different conceptions of the job. The law, regrettably, is not very precise. It allows for ambiguity and personal choice in that regard. So we've had directors of national intelligence who've attempted to direct. In other words, to tell folks in the 17 agencies, what they should be doing, what he expected them to be doing. Our first director of national intelligence, Ambassador Negro Ponte, used to describe himself as a coordinator. He said they should have, in this law, described him as a coordinator of intelligence, and that was how he did it. He was interested in coordinating the work of the 17 agencies. Jim Clapper, whom we've referred to, the longest-serving DNI, integration was what Jim Clapper was about from day one to the end of his tenure. I heard you mention today clearinghouse, holding company, paymaster. There are lots of sports metaphors that have been applied. When you and Joe sit down, after a hard day.
A holding company, not a holding company.
Not a holding company,
Yep.
right. So lots of metaphors out there, none of it is particularly precise or useful in this regard, but how would you describe how you and Joe feel about the job?
Yeah.
What do you think you're there to accomplish? What's your relationship to these other 16 agencies?
Yeah. Part of it has been the natural evolution of the intelligence community and the role of ODNI. So there's been, I think, a growing appreciation for where the value added is with the ODNI. And personally, the way I view it is, one, just because I subscribe to the school of light governance. And I believe truly in the power of the federation. So not a centralization of control or authority, but there is authority there, particularly with the budget, for providing direction. And we do have that responsibility to the community. So we issue direction in planning and programming guidance because we require that, because we can't necessarily expect any one agency or the collective to naturally, if we were just a holding company, to come to a common good. We're better than that than it needs to be, but we do need that direction, but a light direction. But even there, it is the process by which we issue that direction is as a leadership team. So I won't go into the boring bureaucratics of how we do that, but it's pretty rare when we simply kind of come in from on high and say, irrespective of what you think, you will do this. Because typically that's not, it's not well received, but typically it's not effective. Now, there's some cases when you have to do that, but increasingly rare. What we need to do as leaders is get that leadership team to understand what the collective need is, and then as a leadership team, make those hard decisions. Where do we take risk? Where do we invest? What is the role of any one particular agency in that? Because at the end of the day, the way that our threat landscape has evolved, because of the complexity, no one agency can go it alone. We need all those phenomenologies of signals intelligence and imagery and geospatial intelligence and the benefit that a human asset can bring, the perspective they can bring to that, understanding of that intelligence threat. And you only can do that when you integrate these phenomenologies or these collection assets. And the way that threat landscape's evolving too is the speed with which they're operating and that exponential growth, not only of data, but of the democratization of technology, the way that threats come at us are faster. So to be able to respond or to be able to counter those threats or proactively address them requires the speed of operation of that community that increasingly requires on the aid of machines, machine learning, artificial intelligence, and automating our ticking and queuing of sensors. And it doesn't mean that humans are not in the loop, but what it means is increasingly we have to architect a community that responds more quickly to those threats or can gain a speed advantage over adversaries, whether that's an operator on the street or whether that's a automated feature of some weapon system that an adversary is throwing against us. And that takes a kind of architecting and machinery of that community that no one agency can do. It requires that overall leadership.
Team and teamwork.
Team and teamwork.
Keywords. Turning to the topical issues, I found, as I said before, this national security strategy unique, and I think informative in certain ways. You used the words as well. It describes a strategic environment that's shaped by traditional adversaries. You mentioned peer competitors, I think that's a synonym. Technology change and cyber threats. I had to read to page 4 to find religious extremism, which I suppose is a moniker for terrorism. That's not the way the other documents were organized, not the way the national security strategies since 9/11 have been organized. So obviously there's a change underway, a change in priorities. Is that right? And given your team approach to leading this community and the mandate to, I gather, de-emphasize to a certain degree, to the extent you safely can counterterrorism, and begin to recognize different kinds of threats, conventional threats.
Yeah.
So how is that approach and those authorities you described, budget authorities, personnel authorities that do exist in the law, how are you going to use those tools to move this large federated enterprise towards different targets, different objectives?
So I wouldn't call it de-emphasis. What I would call it is the way we prioritize resources going forward. And I guess I would say it is, given the 18 years of investment we've made in the counterterrorism community, the counterterrorism target, it's not to say that threat is any less important or any less scary to us. It's a matter of we have resourced the community so well over the course of 18 years that now that we face a greater proportion of threats from great power competition from the likes of Russia and China, our areas of emphasis and the way we allocate resources has to shift with it. Inevitably, even while resourced, we have to make trades and we have to manage risk differently. So I would say it is we have assumed or incorporated or been led to greater risk now in the great power competition piece that we now have to adjust to do. So it takes this leadership of, again, this team, both at the principal level and the deputy level, to say, the way that the budget is configured year to year, and this massive machinery, $60 billion of intelligence community, you don't just turn on a dime. Use the aircraft carrier analogy. So it takes several cycles to take that national intelligence strategy to drive resource decisions that fundamentally affect how we resource the communities, just by virtue of how large the machine is and how the way budget cycles work, the way investments work, the way programs are executed. But it was true even in the previous 18 years, we had to make risk-based decisions, and we prioritized counterterrorism over others, and now we're finding that we have taken on greater risk with our peer adversaries that we now have to adjust to.
So I appreciate that clarification. So it sounds to me, tell me if this is right, that you want to hold at a high level of capability and effort on preventing acts of terrorism, and focus a lot of your new energy and attention on these peer competitors and conventional military and adversaries of that nature.
That's a fair point.
Okay, I don't want to pursue that much longer. I want to take you back to the DDI, Deputy Director for Innovation at the CIA. Talk about cyber and cybersecurity. pretend to be an expert in any of this, but in our courses, we try to explain to our students that really technology at this time and place is changing everything about intelligence. And some of us can speak from human intelligence experience. The most traditional collection discipline that I can imagine, spot, assess, develop, and recruit spies. Every aspect of that business is changed by technology, as is the rest of it. So CIA, and you were given a big job in 2015, as you said, first new director at CIA in, was it 4 decades?
5.
5 decades.
Yeah, with no playbook about how you do this.
Yeah, how do
and
you
if we had one, it would have been out of date anyway. So
nobody to talk to. They're all gone at this point. So CIA, of course, has a tremendous history and tradition of innovation and inventiveness. The Cold War was dominated by some of the things that our intelligence community was able to do with technology. Nonetheless, CIA is a 70-year-old bureaucracy, and as second DNI, like McConnell used to say, any bureaucracy would rather fail than change. So I imagine that was a challenge for you. Tell me a little bit about what it was like to stand up in your office, develop relationships, and as I understood the mission, to push this new and foreign and daunting technology down to every corner of the agency's mission.
yeah.
So I want to hear about that.
Yeah.
And then I want you to tell me about which of those lessons you take over to your new
Sure. Lots to unpack there. I guess the way I would answer that is, so I, liberal arts major by background, I have a technical aptitude. I've worked with technology over the years, but I was paired with a very deeply skilled technical deputy from the Science and Technology Directorate. And I realized pretty quickly when we were standing up this directorate, by virtue of the way we, because it was a big organization within a large organization, but it was basically carving out from the existing digital centers of excellence of the CIA, a different organization, where again, and this is, kind of human nature and bureaucratic nature is preserve what's mine and preserve what I know, because change is hard and most people don't like change. So I was given a very clear charge to do this. And I approached this job at CIA with an expectation that certain decisions were already made by virtue of the studies that preceded the announcement of this. So I formed a presumptive leadership team and tried to get to work right away with architecting, creating the directorate, moving components, people. And I got some resistance right away, which I wasn't surprised at. But what I was surprised at is when I went to the director, and I said, because he asked me how I was going, I said, well, I'm getting a lot of resistance here, resistance there. And I said, John Brown, I said, you already decided this one, right? I said, no, I made 2 decisions, to hire you and your deputy. The rest you have to both conceive, design the organization, and persuade your peers on the leadership team of CIA that who will view this as a loss to them, because components will come from them. You have to persuade them of the design, the logic, the business model, the operating model, to then make a senior leadership team decision that we'll do this as an agency because we operate as a team. And then it occurred to me, he didn't hire me because I'm technically brilliant, I'm not. But he hired me because the job I had in leading this directorate was about the leadership engineering, the kind of cultural engineering of large-scale transformational change. And that was kind of a jarring moment, but I then realized that's really what large-scale change is about. It's about helping people understand what that different, more optimal outcome is, persuading them that that's the direction they need to move, and then arraying all the coalition of the willing and persuading them, motivating them to do that. It's hugely hard. It wasn't a technological problem. But hugely gratifying, and I knew when Joe McGuire called for this job, to have me take this job, 2 things that told me it was time to leave. Actually, 3 things. A third one I found out recently. The first one was I ran out of business cards. And I had never run out of business cards in any job I've had. Most jobs I've not lasted beyond 18 months. So I ran out of business cards and I thought, this is telling. The second one was I started to see the natural, organic, cultural change, and it no longer required me to do directive dentistry on the organization to compel people, because I knew what the right outcome was. The third one, which I recently learned, was watching Jack Ryan's second season. We were immortalized in popular culture. When I saw Director of Digital Innovation, I thought, my job's done.
That's a great song. I shouldn't steal that, but you had a great line that you used in an interview that I came across, and I'm just curious how you would evaluate how close you came to that. You said you wanted, in this technology discipline, you wanted CIA to be fast followers and early adapters. First off, that's a great line.
Yeah.
But did you get there? I mean, what is the relationship now? How would you describe the CIA with technology?
Yeah.
And how receptive, how fast is the reception and the adaptation?
Great question. There are some areas where we're actually well ahead of the government. Adoption of cloud technology, recognized by experts outside the government, and some within, and said, you are actually well ahead of most of the government adoption of cloud technology. Other areas not as fast adopters. What I had noticed, though, is there, as I was leaving CIA, there's a groundswell, I call it the Grand Awakening, of the recognition that we're at an existential point in our competitiveness as a intelligence service in CIA's case and as a community, because the rate, scope at which our adversaries are employing technology against us and the speed advantage they're gaining, we have to be very fast adopters and adapters to employ that technology to our advantage. And I see throughout the organization, including your old organization, that recognition that we're at an existential point. The challenge is then, okay, how do we apply it? What I knew from DDI, where I was leading, was I brought a commercial first approach to most everything, because the commercial analogs to what we do are growing daily. So the speed with which we can adopt commercial technology and apply it to intelligence, I think will be the decisive factor in our competitiveness. And I don't think that's fully shared throughout the organization or in the community, and I think we need to get there. Because I think that is the key. That means the partnerships that we have with private industry are so critically important in academia and the research community. We have to make this more of a solid state, whole of nation approach.
Thanks for that. Before I leave cyber, I want to just take up that last issue. I intended to ask you a little bit later in the discussion, but the relationship of the government, the intelligence community, national security sector with private industry has gotten a great deal of attention. You mentioned earlier today the decision by a number of Google employees to attempt to shape the company's client relationships, to suit their political views. What is that relationship between the private sector and our intelligence community? And we all understand that it's different than it was in the Cold War when we came to work there, where private industry were very much partners. It was the industrial base on which we protected the country. Something's different today.
Yeah.
How would you describe that, and source of concern or challenge?
A concern only from the standpoint of we're not where we need to be, but I'm comforted by most commercial leaders, CEOs, presidents of companies, really do want to contribute to defending the nation. And so they I think, come most of them with a very strong conviction they have a role to play. But it's not uniform. I think where we have the most challenges with companies that face a real tough balancing act of maintaining the trust and confidence of their user base when that user base doesn't necessarily view the intelligence community as a trusted partner. So the reputational risk on those companies is real. And so the balancing act for them and the challenge they have is how do we persuade not only the user base but our employees in many cases that they can both protect privacy, civil liberties, and the integrity of the product and the trust of their consumers and their user base still contribute to the nation's security. And that, in some companies, in some sectors, very strong. We don't have a big heavy lift there. Others, we have a lot of work to do. And that gets back to the issue of, and the importance of speaking publicly and speaking with those companies and even those employees to build their understanding about what the intelligence community does and doesn't. And I'll use an analogy I used a few years ago. I went out to the Big Boulder Initiative in Boulder, which was 4 or 5 years ago. Because and that was basically the annual gathering of social media companies. And I went out at the invitation of one of the board members because I didn't feel that those platforms understood the intelligence community well enough. So I went out and the point I made, the pitch I made was, we share the same values. Protection of free speech, protection of innocent life, protection of democratic ideals. And we're in the same business in many cases. So for some employees or some platforms and some leaders, they just don't understand this. I think we have been misrepresented in many cases by media, by even cinema. And so we have to build the awareness, we have to build the understanding, build the trust of those partners and those platforms. And the receptivity I got was very strong, more privately. I mean, most of them came up to me privately and said, I learned a whole lot more about CIA and what the intelligence community does just by virtue of that 2-3 hours of engagement. And we won't necessarily, contract with you, but we better understand what you do, and so let's continue the dialogue. And it just takes that constant cultivation of the trust. So, but it's real for many of these platforms of, you've got leadership conviction, but you also have a workforce that has to understand this and trust us, because they've got a voice in the company.
You mentioned earlier transparency, and certainly that's part of it to the extent that you're trying to rebut misconceptions that you think are getting in the way of good business with people we need to do business with. Last question on cyber. You mentioned the volume issue. Cold War was dominated by information scarcity, requiring us to make assessments, judgments, to fill in where we didn't have facts. Different world today. Now it's a problem of volume. I found in my race around the ODNI website a document I hadn't seen before. Augmenting intelligence using machines.
Yes.
So you're an accomplished intelligence analyst, and now in the second part of your career, been exposed to technology responsibilities. Where's that line going to be soon between the job of machines in handling information, and where does that transfer to a human intelligence analyst? Right? How do these two coexist to get to the objective, timely, accurate, insightful intelligence?
The way I characterize it is, that issue has been misrepresented, I think, by many, both in the industry and in popular media, about, artificial intelligence will take over the world and replace humans. I don't subscribe to that. As an intelligence leader, the way I view it is, one, we have to, just given the volume of data and the speed and the variety of data, and this will only get more challenging, we have to use machines to process all of that sensory information that is naturally derived from Internet of Things, from collection platforms, and I view it as it's this human-machine interface, and the role of the machines is not to take over that role of the human or the analyst. It is to enable a higher order human cognition, enable a higher order intelligence tradecraft. do the basic automation, but do the processing of variables and data that we simply can't cognitively do, but free up the unused capacity of our brain to spend on inference if you're an analyst, thinking hard about things, aided by the processing of vast amounts of data. So it's really about enabling a higher human cognition to apply the power of our brain to the intelligence problem to solve that national security problem.
Okay, thank you for that. I'd be remiss, I'm going to have to start prioritizing myself here to stay within our time limits and get to the student questions. Russia election interference.
Yes,
Supplies. There we go.
thank you.
You're doing great.
Thanks.
You're rallying.
I didn't expect to lose my voice.
Russian election interference. So, of course, hard to escape. We're still living with the consequences of Russia's attempts to interfere in our election, the 2016 election. There's a good bit of media reporting, even some official commentary on the 2018 by-election. I think a more positive story, but I'll let you tell that to the extent that you want. And then, of course, we're very concerned about the upcoming election, less than a year away from 2020. So I want you to talk about that, but first, I'll take you back to the Intelligence Community Assessment in January 2017. I haven't asked you, I don't know whether you played a role in drafting that or not, but I'm sure that you've read closely both the unclassified public version as well as the classified version that would have more source identifying information. And we've been working hard at that, I presume, for the succeeding 3 years, trying to understand if we got it right, or if we need more or less or better. How's that hold up in your view?
It holds up well. We got that right. And the unclassified assessment is representative of the classified assessment as well. We got it right. It was compelling, as we've said publicly. And it really was not only about we got it right, but we learned so much in that process about how to configure our defense for 2018 better. We were better in 2018 than 2016. I think we're better for 2020 as well. But we still have work to do. So I guess what I would say about that is the elections are identifiable, proximal representation of our democratic system and our choices. Really key, important point. What I think we can't lose sight of is, both in the lead up to that election, is the foreign influence operations coming in to divide us societally. That's having a real effect now. It's even before we get to the ballot box. These adversaries are shaping how we view our candidates, our society, the divisions that are resident within society. And so that's not only wrong to divide us, but it also it's affecting how votes will be cast in 2020. But it doesn't stop then. So this will be a constant challenge for us, and a constant threat is learning how to array our intelligence community and our government resources to deal with that pervasive, insidious attack on our society. And it'll be both enduring there, and it'll be enduring in the next elections too, because I don't think this will be a 1, 2, or 3 time thing.
So 2 quick follow-ups on that. I may just be repeating what you said.
Let me just,
Sure.
and one of the reasons we speak about this and we engage publicly about this is because the best defense, I think, for this, both in the lead up to the elections and during the election afterward, is to equip the American public in taking a more discerning eye to what they read, see, and hear. Helping them be more, not a cynical, but a critical eye to what they read, see, and hear. Because I think largely everyone still trusts what they see, read, and hear. And I think we have to have a better frontline defense by a well-informed public to do that. So that's why we engage.
So would I be correct to infer that the intelligence community is joking, is that Russia is and continues to attempt to influence our society and will
Yes.
attempt to influence the 2020 election.
Yes. We don't know exactly how they'll influence 2020. I think we think they're still, they've got options, but they're still at this.
Okay, so they remain undeterred, or at least undissuaded from pursuing this sort of thing. You mentioned some of that, what you'd like to see in terms of the public's skepticism, scrutiny, and diligence before they consume information. I was surprised and pleasantly surprised to read a public statement that the ODNI participated in, issued in early November, if I remember, the 4th or
Yes.
something like that. I haven't seen a document like that before, to the extent that it appeared to be addressed to the American people.
Was.
This is the threat we face, this is how we performed in the last election, here's what we're preparing to do. In the next election, here's what we need from you. And the ODNI joined a number of traditionally public-facing
Yes.
policy organizations,
Yes.
the Justice Department, the Defense Department,
Yes.
the Department of Homeland Security. What's the thinking behind that?
We
Is that a new mark, something we should expect,
Yeah.
a dialogue with the people?
Yes.
Not from the White House, but from cabinet agencies.
Yes. And we didn't join, we led that effort, we were still leading that effort. And you'll see more of that, and more of that engagement. And again, it was born out of this conviction that we have to build the confidence of the American people that we are actively working to defend our elections and raise awareness. It is different. We don't typically do that kind of thing. But again, that's representative of our conviction that this is such a grave threat to our nation that we have to engage publicly. It's also part of our transparency. So we organize this way too. We created a position for election threat executive purely to focus on election security. And Sheldon Pearson leads a cross-intelligence community group of people to ensure that we array our resources and our capabilities and our authorities to defend against these threats, because the adversaries are operating and exploiting the seams of our authorities and our capabilities. So the better organized we are and the better orchestrated, I think the better we can defend against those elections. And so with the help of DHS, FBI, NSA, the entire intelligence community, I think we're better equipped for 2020. But it'll still be challenging.
And we can expect more communication from our intelligence community to the public about what they know, what they think, and what to expect. Interesting. One last topic, and it's a repeat for you because we had a great lunch conversation, and I'd love to have you repeat for this group. Serving the president, as I mentioned, you have the privilege of briefing President Obama, and I can assure you there's no greater privilege in the U.S. intelligence community than delivering the work of upwards of 100,000 people and $60 billion a year to the first customer. But supporting a modern president is different than it has been in CIA's history. The amount of information, news and information, the volume, the immediacy of it that's available to a modern president is just, could not have been imagined in our history. And this is not a comment on President Trump's consumption of intelligence or consumption of news, because President Obama, whom you served, was an avid, voracious consumer of digital and other information, and President Bush, who I served, was a tremendous reader and was well informed before any intelligence briefing. So how does the intelligence community in this saturated environment of immediate, high-volume information on topics of concern to the president, advice and facts coming from all corners, how's the intelligence community in the future going to earn its access to the president's time? You don't have a statutory monopoly on informing his decisions, so why would a future president take the time every morning, as recent presidents have, to hear from him? What's going to be the comparative advantage?
Great question. And I'll back up a little bit and say, to your point, is every president has a different preference for how they receive information and how they incorporate intelligence in their daily decision making. And one of the features, as Steve knows well, and many of you do too, is one of the enduring features of the intelligence community is we approach every administration as objectively, because that's our history, produce objective intelligence to serve the Constitution of the United States. We've taken up a oath of office to it, all of us. And so in many respects, it doesn't matter to us who sits in the office. We serve all presidents, all administrations, regardless of who holds the office. So, and I didn't know when I was selected, I didn't know who was going to serve. He selected me before the election, and so I just knew I was going to serve one of two candidates. But what I quickly found, to your point, was with the president was they have a vast access to a lot of information, a lot of really expert advice, and we always have to learn our place. And we don't start necessarily with a guaranteed place at any Oval Office. We have to earn it. We've earned it over the course of decades. So the presumption is by every president is you'll have a place, but you have to keep it, to continually earn it. So we always have to add value to their decision-making cycle, to their information, because they have access to a lot of it. So this is, with every single piece of intelligence that we put up for the Oval Office, for the president, for the team, the course of producing that is always an eye toward, is there value? What's unique? What is insightful in that piece? And there are a lot of pieces, a lot of intelligence that we do not bring to the president because we determine it's not insightful enough to warrant his time. So we'll kill it. We'll continue to generate better. I think, so there's always a value calculation that we have to make. And that both has a bearing on how we present it, form, the medium, and the frequency. And what increasingly I think we've been adjusting to is the older or traditional cycles of decision making was we could afford to every morning deliver intelligence to the president because the decision making cycles were a little bit more predictable. Now, because of the wealth of information that they have available to them, and frankly, the shorter decision-making cycles that they have now, we have to think about how do we then frequently provide the intelligence to that policy-making cycle, decision-making cycle. Now, we don't view it as we have to chase the news. So we have to be circumspect about where we have the value. But it will continue to be one where we have to constantly think about innovating how we present it, the frequency, the mode, the medium, and greater visualization of data. And to your point earlier, excuse me, with more use of machine learning, computational power to a lot of data, is helping the consumer understand where they may have been comfortable before, understanding that the analysis was derived from an intercepted communication or a human asset that reported on something. That was easier for them to understand over time how to be trustful of that, have confidence in it. But now where we have more insight drawn from computational models, a lot of data, is we have both a trick craft to employ in how we present that confidence in that and characterize it so the consumer has trust, but help them over time have confidence that that insight derived that we're presenting to you is derived from an algorithm and a lot of data. So that's a new challenge for us.
Just one quick follow-up on that. In an era, as you described earlier in the case of Russia, sort of persistent disinformation, and interference, and then credit to my colleague Bobby Chesney, Bobby's still here, who's written and thought extensively about deep fakes, right? Is part of the intelligence community's advantage going forward veracity, credibility? You're going to run some checks on something before you tell the president that his other sources or her other sources of information might not have bothered to run.
Yeah, I guess what I would say to that is my perception, accurate or not, is I think traditionally we have, again, by virtue of the model I talked about before of answering specific questions, the targets weren't static, but they were a little bit more predictable. They were military movements, or they were decisions held within a foreign power that we had to access to reveal so we could inform policy. Now we have a adversarial offensive capability being employed against us. Deepfakes is another case of it. So we're not only having to collect against the targets, but there's an adversarial AI being employed against us where we have to be quick to detect, quick to turn it to our advantage. That's a speed advantage we have to gain. So in some respects, the targets are moving faster than they used to. So that, again, the importance of applying AI and machine learning to our intelligence to provide greater and quicker insight, and in some respects countering those deepfakes and those influence operations as they're coming at us in a more sophisticated and quicker way.
Thanks for that. That's great. A couple quick student questions for you. From Travis, LBJ School student, Kearns Business School, U.S. Navy officer. I don't know if you heard Travis. This is a paraphrase. I rewrote your questions. Welcome to the DI. After the 9/11 attacks, the IC was restructured and optimized to combat terrorism. In view of the national security strategy shift to addressing great power threats, should the IC make structural changes to address these new threats? Do we need to move the boxes?
I don't think so. I mean, it's a lot of people reach for, well, change the lines and boxes, and I don't think that's the answer. You can always tweak an organization or a community. You'll have to make changes over time just by virtue of kind of the natural evolution of a big organization. But it's really more about what I call operating models, how we actually employ practice theory of intelligence, how we integrate collection and analysis in a way that is producing a greater insight than just the sum of those parts. That, I think, is more important than the way you change a line box, because that will have its, a new organizational construct will have its own context. So I don't see any now kind of obvious imperative to change a structure.
Okay, this next question nests fairly nicely in that conversation from Connor, LBJ School student in my course, actually, a great student. We've studied how strategic surprises like Pearl Harbor and 9/11 are often followed by attempts to reform the structure of the intelligence community. If a crisis struck tomorrow, what structural features of the IC would policymakers immediately change?
Good question. I don't know is the short answer.
We don't know what went wrong.
We don't. But, you know, as we saw with 9/11, as we saw with Pearl Harbor, those kind of monumental events sometimes are necessary shocks. And we'll have more of them in the future. We have to expect that. We don't know what that will be. We don't know if it'll be a terrorist attack. We don't know if it'll be a surprise attack by a foreign adversary. So it's hard to know what kind of imperative that'll be for the organization, for the community. Part of that is not knowable until we actually have the introspection following a major event. It may not be known until the actual event happens.
The solution to the Pearl Harbor attack is not the answer to the 9/11
That's right.
attack.
That's right. And it took time after 1947 for that, both for the organizations, but also the way they operate together. That took an evolution. It didn't happen overnight.
Although, as you know, historically speaking, a lot of common themes about sharing information, cooperation, teamwork, to borrow this phrase. Carolyn, who's one of our law students, national security law student, regarding new Commerce Department rules on supply chain integrity. Will the ability to review and disallow commercial transactions involving components that originate in adversary states, I'm not sure if you've read these new rules yet, they're out, prevent foreign governments from penetrating our telecommunications infrastructure? What's the role of the intelligence community in supporting these reviews that I presume the Commerce Department will undertake?
into all the components that go into the supply chain for telecommunications networks?
I don't know precisely, so I'm not familiar in particular with the way the policy apparatus is run. I'll just say that we have a role in intelligence, and we actually operate in those kind of decision-making cycles and informing, helping even non-intelligence agencies employ new rules. So there is input of the intelligence community in that process. I don't know existed particularly with this one.
Yeah, these are newly released rules, and obviously addresses a threat that the intelligence community helped describe, helped define, right?
Yeah.
People inserting things into your supply chain.
And there's a senior policymaking role where when those national security decisions are made about big changes to policy, we are at the table and provide the intelligence foundation for that. But then also we have people who are involved in kind of the operating of the bureaucratic machinery that when we implement a decision like this, we provide intelligence to that inform it.
Just a new job.
Yeah.
The job
Yep.
never seems to end. We've left a lot on the cutting room floor here, so you'll have to come back and finish the discussion. But before we wrap up, I wanted to, you delivered the pitch earlier from the lectern. A lot of students here, a lot of folks interested in careers, maybe ones like the one you've had. How did you find intelligence as a career? How did intelligence find you?
Yeah.
How do you prepare when you're still at the university? Technology. What do liberal arts majors need to know about technology, and what do our STEM people need to know about the world?
Yeah.
How do you prepare to be modern intelligence? Sorry if that was too succinct. But that's my life. Helping technologists.
You implied something there, I think.
Yeah. Go ahead, tell us your
So
how this happened.
I found it when I was in graduate school with, again, my principal professor at American University who was on sabbatical. And both in the teaching of the courses, naturally we talked about many of the things you probably have studied as well, but the role of intelligence. But I think it was, and he was not a recruiter, but he just exposed me to enough of intelligence for me to understand the really important role that intelligence plays. And I think it was I viewed it as, I kind of naturally came to it because I saw the opportunity there for an intellectually curious individual to practice their intelligence and carry in what I studied in school in a way that I presumed and later found over the course of 30 years was true. It was just never ending satisfaction of, wow, that's interesting, it's always changing, I was never bored. It was fascinating. It has been for 30 years. I'm as committed today and as excited today. I've got as much psychic bounce today about my job that I did the first day I started. And I don't know a whole lot of fields or companies, businesses where after 30 years you end with the same passion that you started with on day one. It could be me as an individual, I don't know. But I probably needed to know more about technology as a liberal arts major than I did. I eventually learned more of it. And similarly, a STEM student probably needs some rounding that they may not have. So I guess what I would say is it takes a rounding of skills. Critical to when I started it was less about my educational training. It was more about hiring for critical thinking and judgment. And the actual subject matter expertise, a lot of it I learned on the job, which was interesting because a lot of people think, well, you're hired as an expert, you'll forever be an expert. And not the case, because both the mission demands change, and you want to be, as an intelligence professional, versed in a lot of different subjects, because that's the way the world works. The world does not operate according to one specific discipline, one specific geographical boundary. So you have to have that grounding. So what I would say is, if you're contemplating a career in intelligence, I know I found jump in. It's fascinating. I used the word intoxicating earlier.
We don't
and
talk
it
about it
is.
like that.
Yeah. That's a different meaning. But seriously, and I guess what I would say too is, I can't overstate the pride you take in actually affecting materially the security of the nation. And unless you live it, you experience it, it's abstract. But when you do, you know this, you've served. There is no greater reward. I mean, there's no higher calling. And the satisfaction you get from, and I had one time I had a neighbor who made a lot of money in early on in the technical field. And I remember one day he said to me, this was early in our careers, and he had just gotten to the exponential part of his compensation. And so he was a neighbor. But
You were still neighbors?
Yeah, we were still neighbors at that time. But I remember one day, he knew what I did, and he said, I so envy you. And I said, why? He said, you make more money than God now. And he said, because what you do has meaning, and I just make money, and I make more money for the sake of making money, but at the end of the day, I just make money. What you do has meaning beyond what I could ever get in being well compensated. And he said, I would trade places with you in a heartbeat if I could. I think it was powerful for me early on, but when you see this over the course of your career, it is just indescribable, the feeling you have, because it's just, you can't compensate financially that kind of reward when you have that kind of outcome.
Concur.
Thank you.
You're a great role model.
Thank you.